Did you know there are three kinds of aces? Those who seek strength, those who live for pride, and those who can read the tide of battle. Those are the three. And him? He was a true ace.
Since the release of Ace Combat Zero: The Belkan War back in 2006, fans of the Ace Combat series have debated which ace style represents Cipher's canonical path. This debate stems from the fact that the game never explicitly tells us which path is canon for its titular protagonist. At least that's the impression most players get when they first experience this iconic title. But what if I told you that the franchise's narrative actually points to a clear answer? That's right, I believe it becomes fairly obvious which ace style is canon once we consider the stories of both Ace Combat Zero and Ace Combat 5: The Unsung War. That being said, before we dive into the details or even get into the many fan theories that exist, I think it would be first prudent to briefly explain what ace styles are for those who might not have played the game but are still fans of the series. In Ace Combat Zero, the way you play determines which path Cipher follows. If you only engage red targets, you'll become a knight. If you attack all red targets along with some yellow ones, you'll take the path of the soldier. But if you go after everything, maximizing your mission score, you'll transform into a bloodthirsty, profit-driven mercenary. Each distinct path affects the enemy aces you will face in the game. It'll also change the dialogue you hear and even which additional aces you might encounter beyond the game's main bosses. And most importantly, the ace style determines the morality and character of Cipher. Interestingly enough, you aren't locked into any particular path. You can literally change your ace style as you play through the game's campaign. Nevertheless, what is perhaps the most common fan theory regarding Cipher's true path is the claim which posits that Cipher was a mercenary. This is the case for many fans precisely because the mercenary path is the only path in which the player, being Cipher, gets to encounter three prominent characters from Ace Combat 5. The pilots in question being Wolfgang Buckner, aka Pops or Hookenbein the Raven, Jack Bartlett, aka Heartbreak 1, and Ashley Burnett, aka Grabok 1 and head of the 8492nd Squadron. Now this is vitally important in determining Cipher's canonical ace style precisely because Ace Combat 5 and Ace Combat Zero are intimately intertwined. Despite being the first game in the timeline and despite the Unsung War being the third game in the timeline, Zero is a direct prequel to Ace 5. We also know from the lore of the franchise that both Bartlett and Pops were shot down in the same battle or general area. And we know it was Ashley who downed Bartlett. And this all took place in the Belkan War. The reason for these cameos being present in the mercenary playthrough of the mission Mayhem is actually quite fucking obvious. As such, we can deduce that at a bare minimum, Cipher was on the mercenary path during the height of the Belkan War. Be that as it may, this conclusion is not definitive and ignores some glaringly obvious narrative hints that stem from Ace Combat 5, which is literally connected to Zero. Now, another common fan theory is that there is truly no canonical ace style for Cipher, given that we're told that the Belkan War's history is not only convoluted, but also so open to interpretation that Brett Thompson, the reporter narrating the story of Ace Combat Zero, claimed that everyone was a hero and a villain, that everyone was a victim and an aggressor during the war. While this is a strong position to take, at face value, it sort of collapses when we zoom out to include the story of Ace Combat 5. When we look at the Unsung War, we'd see that one of the central elements to that particular story is the in-universe folklore legend of the Demon of Rosgreaves. Here's the legend as explained by Albert Jeanette.
When history witnesses a great change, Rosgreaves reveals itself, first as a dark demon. As a demon, it uses its power to rain death upon the land, and then it dies. However, after a period of slumber, Rosgreaves returns, this time as a great hero.
Given that Cipher is known as the Demon Lord of the Round Table, we can already see that he's tied to a legend pertaining to a demon. We also know that Cipher takes to the skies when history witnesses a great change. A change so great that it's referenced in another fucking game. We also know he was a bloodthirsty mercenary that destroyed everything in his path. at least all the way up to the height of the war. We also know that once the Balkan War ended in June of 1995, hostilities ceased until December of that very same year, when the organization known as A World With No Boundaries began its campaign to essentially hard reset the world with their V2 rocket. After being, quote, asleep or in a slumber for some time, Cipher returns to defeat his former friend and wingman, Pixie, in the skies over Avalon Dam, thus saving the world from the V2 rocket and hence making him a hero.
When history witnesses a great change, Razgriz reveals itself, first as a dark demon. As a demon, it uses its power to rain death upon the land, and then it dies. However, after a period of slumber, Razgriz returns, this time as a great hero.
Now, ponder this for just a moment. What is the thematic string which ties Ace Combat 5 to Ace Combat 0? Of course, there's the obvious social commentary on the pitfalls of war and shitty political decisions, but aside from covering a past war, what does Zero have to do with the unsung war? Guys, the narrative connection is the legend of Razgriz. Cipher is the original Razgriz, hence the title Zero. This is also why the music of Ace Combat 0 follows a very similar musical motif found in Ace Combat 5. As such, we're really only left with one conclusion when we really piece together everything that we do know. Cipher starts the war off as a mercenary and eventually transitions to a knight. A hero who saves the world, not for money, not for the sake of duty to one's own national allegiances, but rather because saving the world is the right and noble thing to do. To assert that Cipher remains as a mercenary is to assert that he was the only person on fucking planet Earth unaffected by the 7 nuclear bombs being dropped on Belka by the Belkans. It's to assume that he's the only person who wasn't affected by the firebombing of Hoffnung. Pixie was clearly affected by these events, and so were many other veterans. This is why many from all sides of the war came together to form the organization known as A World Without Boundaries. It's also silly to assume Cipher was a canonical soldier, given that he literally has no ties to any nation involved in the war. He's either working for cash or because he actually believes in a specific cause. Last but not least is the many allusions to the Arthurian legend which are woven into the lore of Ace Combat 0. Cipher is the one who metaphorically pulls Excalibur from the stone when he literally destroys the Belkan Excalibur superweapon. He's literally known as the King of B7R, known as the Round Table. Avalon is the place where King Arthur goes to rest for an eternity. It is also the location where Arthur is prophesied to return from during Britain's greatest hour of need. As such, it only makes sense to deduce that Cipher ends the story as a knight, just as King Arthur was once a knight. But if you're not convinced by any of this, merely look at Pixie's aircraft during the final mission. Pixie, being the antagonist at this point in the story, is flying the ADFX-02 Morgan, a jet literally named after Morgan Le Fay, who is commonly known to be an antagonist towards King Arthur. And in this final duel with the Morgan, Cipher pretty much has an aerial joust with Pixie, just like fucking knights. Like guys, the narrative isn't really being subtle about this. So, in the end, Cipher's journey is not just that of a mercenary or a soldier, but of a warrior transformed, the demon lord who awakens as a knight to save the world. His story mirrors the legend of Razgriz and echoes the myth of Arthurian Avalon, proving that even the fiercest demon can become a hero when history demands it. Cipher's true ace style isn't just a matter of player choice. It's a narrative of redemption, one that cements him as the original Razgriz, and perhaps the greatest ace in Ace Combat history. Anyways, if you like this sort of content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I don't normally cover Ace Combat, but I sort of wanted to cover this topic ever since I was a kid, because you know, this was one of my favorite games when I was growing up. That being said, you may opine anytime if you feel so inclined down in the comments section. I'm Captain Gold, and I hope to see you in my next Gold Standard video.